the hush of rain on birch leaves. That is how the world welcomes you tonight. The patter is soft and shy, barely more than a whisper, as if the trees are confiding secrets to the soil beneath them. The air smells of moss and wet iron, a scent that clings to weathered wood and skin, too long kissed by wind. Beneath that breath of rain lies a silence, not absence, but fullness, as if the land itself is holding still for something sacred. Come now, close your eyes, and let your breath fall into the rhythm of that silence. There is a boat waiting for you, carved not for voyages of trade or conquest, but for something older, quieter, and perhaps more enduring than either. Let us drift toward it, slowly. In the year 834, along the narrow inlets near Vestfold, where the fjords of what we now call Norway meet the deeper sea, there lived a people who feared little in life, but who approached death as one might a sleeping bear, not with fear, but with reverence, and great care not to awaken something best left dreaming. The village of Kaupang was quieter now than it had been during the spring fair. The voices of traders, the shouting of iron sellers and amber hawkers had vanished with the thaw. Summer was now bending into its middle weeks, and the scent of salted cod and nettle soup hung in the thatched air. Children had grown brown with sun, and hands calloused with harvest or rowing. A boy named Halvard sat near the dock, small fingers pulling at the moss along the stones. He was just past 10, lean as a sapling, his eyes wide and gray as morning. His father, Audbjorn, was a carver, not of runes or ships, but of the dead, a death boat maker, a slow profession, but a steady one. Not everyone could burn their dead, you see. Not everyone wished to. That day, Halvard had followed his father to the covered shed near the fjord's edge, where a new boat rested under shadow. It was small, no wider than 3 arms across, with ribs of pine steamed and bent to a perfect curve. Its hull had been coated in pitch the night before, and the scent of it clung thick in the air. There were no shields on this one, no bright paint, no carved beast on its prow, just wood and silence, and inside it, a woman. Her name had been Runa, though Halvard was not supposed to say it aloud now. Once a name crossed the lips after death, it drifted, and could find its way into dreams, or worse, back into a breathing mouth that no longer remembered how to speak kindly. She had been old, though not so old as to be bowed, a spinner, a healer, and some said, a listener. They said she spoke to trees. They said her dreams came true. Halvard had once stolen a berry from her garden, only to find his mouth dry and swollen the next morning. His mother said it was a wasp sting. He had never taken another. Now she lay in the boat, dressed in wool, the color of frost and night sky. Her hands were crossed over her chest, and beneath them lay a pouch of something unknown. It smelled, faintly, of mead and dried rosemary. Around her neck was a bead of jet, and 2 small bones carved into the shape of wings. There was no torch near the boat, no pyre, no rush of wood waiting to be lit. Halvard tugged at his father's sleeve. Why no fire? Audbjorn was a man of few words, and those he spoke came slowly, as if drawn up from the seabed rather than his throat. He looked toward the boat and rubbed the graying hair at his temple. Because, he said at last, the sea must forget her. Halvard did not understand then, not fully. He only knew that the others who had passed, warriors, wives, even children, were sent to flame. Their bones cracked in the heat, and their souls, as the elders said, rode smoke into the sky, where the gods might catch them in their long hands and carry them beyond the northern lights. But not Runa. The boat would not burn. Instead, they would push her from shore when the tide turned, and the boat would drift out to where salt met sky. Some said she would reach an island that could not be mapped. Others believed she would circle the sea endlessly until she chose to return. Halvard was told not to speak of it to the other boys. That night, the village gathered in near silence, save for the wet rustle of waves licking stone. Runa's boat was carried to the water's edge, borne not by kin, for she had none, but by 4 women in cloaks of undyed wool. Each moved with the slowness of ritual, and when they knelt to place the hull into the tide, their hands trembled not with grief, but with something heavier. Audbjorn lit no torch. No man did. Instead, he stepped forward with a sprig of juniper and swept it 3 times over the prow, whispering in words so old that even Halvard's grandmother would not have known them. Then the boat was let go. No one clapped. No one wept aloud. They simply watched, breath held, as the death boat slid free from shore and began its slow glide toward the waiting dusk. The water was still. The moon, half closed in the sky, cast a threadbare light along the hull. Runa's pale fingers caught it, briefly, before the shadows swallowed her whole. A gull cried once, and then not again. Halvard felt something in his chest. Not sorrow, not exactly. Something more like the moment before rain. Not fear, not peace, but the knowing that something invisible had shifted. When he asked again, days later, his father simply said, "Some must be remembered. Others must be left. But left where? And by whom? Have you ever wondered what it might feel like to be carried away, not with fire and song, but with silence and tide? To be remembered only by the water's weight? To drift beyond all shores and into something that does not have a name?" Years passed. Halvard grew taller, stronger. The lines in his father's face deepened like the cracks in the oar handles. Death became more familiar, but never ordinary. Still, some were burned, some were not. And each time it happened, each time one was pushed without fire, the silence in the village thickened for days. Bread went unsalted. Songs were hummed, but not sung. It was as if the wind itself was listening. No one ever said why aloud. Some believed those boats bore souls who had seen too much, those who had touched something that lived beneath the veil of waking. Others believed they were dangerous not because of what they had done, but because of what might happen if the gods were to notice them. But Halvard, he remembered the way Runa's boat moved, not with hurry, not with struggle, as if the sea had known she was coming and opened itself like a cradle. And that thought, that the sea could remember, stayed with him longer than any prayer or rune. The wind tonight is a hush against linen, the faint flapping of a drying sail, forgotten on its line. It carries the scent of worn rope and sea fennel, and underneath the faintest trace of wood smoke, as though someone far off is boiling a pot of juniper tea over glowing coals. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the creak of a boat's ribs in the darkness, shifting with the tides even in sleep. So let us return to that shore where the water remembers. The summer after Runa's boat was set adrift, Halvard began learning to shape the bones of vessels. His father's workshop smelled always of shavings and pitch, with curls of pale pine falling to the ground like strands of hair from the world's oldest creature. The boats they made were not only for the dead, most were for the living. Fishing craft, narrow skiffs, merchant longboats. But the death boats were always built with a slower rhythm. as though each nail, each rib, had to listen before it was placed. Audbjorn did not explain the difference in words. He only demonstrated it with silence, by the care with which he touched the grain, the way he paused before carving each curve, as though remembering something not quite visible. Halvard would watch his father run his calloused fingers over the planks, whispering to himself in low breaths. Sometimes it was a chant. Sometimes it was a question. By then, Halvard was 12, and already his hands could hold a draw knife steady. He learned to steam wood with seaweed and ash, to listen for the hollow knock that told him the hull was sound. But when he asked to help with a boat for the dead, Audbjorn would only nod once, slowly, and then make him sweep the floor. Still, Halvard observed. There came a morning in the first frost of autumn, when word arrived that Brander the reed catcher had passed. A man of many summers, his back bent like a question mark, and his hands always smelling of bog mud. He had lived alone at the edge of the wetland, where birds bred and spirits were said to whisper beneath the reeds. He had died in his sleep, curled with his face toward the hearth. No family, no children, only stories of the things he knew, and the things he never told. His body was washed and wrapped in linen boiled with herbs. A coin was placed under his tongue, and a feather beneath each foot. And again, there was no fire prepared. Halvard knew what that meant now. The silence returned to the village like a tide, not a sudden wave, but a slow swelling. Meals were eaten in murmurs. The blacksmith covered his anvil for 3 days. Children did not play near the water. And again, his father built slowly, one rib at a time. The boat was smaller than some, deeper than most. When it was finished, its inside was lined with woven mats of dried reed, not ordered, not symmetrical, but placed in a pattern that made Halvard's eyes ache when he stared too long. Was this how Brander asked it? He whispered. No, his father said without looking up. This is how the reeds asked. Halvard felt a shiver then, not of cold, but of recognition, as if a part of the world had just looked at him and blinked. The night of the setting, fog drifted in like smoke from an invisible torch. People stood on the bank without speaking, their breath like ghosts in the lantern light. Brander's boat was pushed gently into the still water, with no cry, no fire, no horn, only the sound of frogs in the reeds and the low gurgle of the tide. As the boat disappeared, Halvard leaned close to his father and asked again, voice small, "Why not burn them?" Audbjorn's lips pressed tight. He did not answer. But later, when the moon was overhead and the stars hung like white beads on a black thread, Halvard found him still sitting by the shed, the carving knife unmoving in his hand. "It's not that they cannot be burned," the old man said softly. "It's that flame would remember them. And they must not be remembered." Halvard sat beside him. "How do you know who must be forgotten?" Audbjorn sighed then, not in weariness, but in the way a tree sighs when a strong wind leans into it. "Because it must. They dream differently," he said. "The ones we send to the fire, they carry dreams like light. The ones we send to the sea, they carry weight, heavy things, things not made for fire, things the sea can hold, if it chooses." Halvard thought of Runa, of her hands folded over that pouch, of Brander's wrinkled face, eyes shut as though halfway through a sentence. And the boy did not ask more, but the thoughts lingered. That winter, snow came early. The fjord froze before the last fish were caught, and the ice groaned like a restless god. Halvard's mother hung spruce branches over the door to keep out the old spirits that wandered during the long dark. People burned tallow candles until the smoke darkened the beams. And when the village held its winter feast, no tales were told of the two who had drifted into silence. Halvard noticed that too. Years passed like slow tides, washing the boy into the shape of a young man. His shoulders broadened. His hands learned to measure a hull by sound. He could bend wood with heat and pressure like breath, and see a curve before it existed. By 17, he could build a working fishing boat in less than 10 days. But the death boats, those still came slowly. One evening in his 18th summer, Audbjorn's hand began to tremble. It started with the small knife he kept tucked in his belt, the one he used for fine carving. Then it spread, first to his grip on the adze, then to his spoon at supper. He did not complain, but Halvard knew. The old man began leaving more to his son. Not just the smoothing of planks, but the choosing of timber, the placement of ribs, even the first shaping of the keel. And Halvard, with each motion, felt both pride and the weight of something invisible climbing into his shoulders. And then one morning, the messenger came. A boy from the eastern woodlands, no older than 12, barefooted and panting with the urgency of someone sent with a name they did not understand. Halvard listened. His breath slowed. The one who had passed was not of Kaupang. She had lived alone, in a forest clearing 3 valleys away. A woman of no clan, no kin, known only by rumor. Some said she had once been a priestess. Others called her a whisper mother, the kind who wove words for those who had no one to speak for them. No one had seen her in over a year. And yet her body had been found, clean and wrapped in wool, placed atop a flat stone as if by her own hand. Beside her, a pouch of dried berries and an oiled bone comb. Around her body, 12 black feathers laid in a perfect circle. Halvard said nothing to the boy, only nodded and began choosing wood. When he told his father, Audbjorn did not argue. He only said, "Pitch it deeply. She will drift long." So Halvard built. And with every motion he remembered. He remembered Runa. He remembered Brander. And he wondered, what made a soul too heavy for fire? Was it knowledge? Guilt? Power? Or was it something older? Something wordless? Something the bones of the boat could carry, if shaped just right? He built the boat wide and deep, with a low rim and no decoration. Just as before, no torches were prepared, no kindling, no urn, only the boat and a slow current. And when it was done, Halvard looked up at the stars. They did not speak, but the water lapped gently against the shore, and the boat rocked once, as though nodding to something unseen. Have you ever wondered if silence can be a kind of remembering? A way of saying that some things are too sacred, too dangerous, or too full of meaning to be spoken aloud. The sea remembers what fire cannot. And there are names it buries gently beneath the tide, never to rise again. There is a softness tonight, like wool pulled over your ears. The world is muffled and dim, as if dusk is still caught between the branches. A cool hush moves through the grass. Not a breeze, but the slow exhale of earth settling into itself. Far off, you might imagine the lapping of water against wood, the gentle rocking of a boat tied to nothing, floating, waiting. Let your thoughts drift too, quietly, like fallen petals on a stream. Halvard stood by the water's edge with his hands still marked in pitch. The boat he had carved now bobbed lightly on the inlet, its oiled hull slick with moonlight. It had no name, for names were weight. It had no figurehead, for symbols could invite the wrong attention. It was a vessel of forgetting, not of story. The woman they were sending had already been placed inside. Her limbs wrapped neatly, her hair combed back into two dark braids, one to each side like river channels parting at the mouth. Her eyes were closed with two small stones, smooth and blue-gray, the kind found only deep in the fjord's folds. No coin, no jewels, only a length of red thread tied around one finger, a finger that pointed upward as if asking a silent question of the sky. No one had come to see her off. There had been no chant, no clapping of staves, no calling to Odin or Freya. It was not because she was unloved. It was because her path was not meant to be followed. The moon was high and the water flat. A moment of perfect stillness, the kind that comes just before something is released, not broken, not ended, but gently allowed to go. Halvard placed one hand on the stern, the other on the rope that held the boat to a single branch driven into the shore. He looked once more at the woman inside. There was no fear in her face, no peace either. Just the quiet dignity of one who had already walked far beyond. He untied the rope. The boat glided forward with no resistance, as if something unseen was already pulling it outward, not into the current, but into a direction beyond the compass. Halvard watched until it disappeared, then longer still. Behind him, his father's voice was low, almost swallowed by the mist. "She'll pass the kelp beds by morning." Halvard nodded, but did not speak. Together, they walked back to the shed, where the scent of old cedar and damp wool clung to the beams. The fire was low. A pot of dried peas and nettles sat untouched. Neither man was hungry. That night Halvard did not sleep. Instead, he lay awake and listened to the distant cry of seabirds and the strange hush that followed. A hush that seemed thicker than usual, like a blanket laid too close to the mouth. He tried not to think of the boat, of its slow drift, of the body within it, and what dreams, if any, might still cling to it like mist on a sail. Morning came gray and slow. No sun, only light. Halvard rose early, before the others, and walked to the water. There was nothing, no sign of the boat, no feathers, not even a piece of bark. The sea had taken her, as it had taken Runa and Brander before her. And yet, Halvard's chest felt heavy, like there was a knot there, not yet unspooled. He could not explain it, even to himself. It was not grief. It was not fear. It was not even wonder. It was a kind of noticing, a knowing, without a name. He returned to his work, shaping beams, patching hulls, sharpening the iron rivets that held bones to belly. Villagers brought him requests for winter boats and salt trays. He mended an old skiff for a blind man and carved a new rudder for a merchant's son. The days passed in smoke and pine and the tick of time, but sometimes, in the quietest moments, his mind would return to the red thread on the woman's finger. Who had tied it? And for what? That winter, his father's hand shook more. He no longer worked with the odds and left the fine carving to Halvard entirely. But he watched, always watching, sometimes with pride, sometimes with a stillness that unsettled Halvard more than any words. By early spring, the ground thawed just enough to split. And the breath of the village changed. A death came. This time, it was someone Halvard knew well. Arni, the weaver, a man of laughter and bad teeth, who had once shown Halvard how to tell black flax from spoiled. He had died in his sleep, curled beside his loom. Halvard arrived at the house before the sun cleared the thatch. The air smelled of beeswax and wet wool. Arnie's body lay neatly wrapped in 2 layers of linen, mouth closed with care. A small wooden comb rested beneath his left hand, and a woven belt, still unfinished, was tucked under his knees. Halvard looked to the hearth and saw the fire was not lit. That was the sign. This was not a burning. He did not ask questions. He only returned home and chose the wood, pine, alder, and for the ribs, birch, sacred and forgiving. The boat took him longer than usual, not because of its shape, but because of a single dream that began to return each night. A dark boat on endless water. No stars, no moon. Just the sound of something breathing beneath the surface, slow and so wide it echoed. Each morning, he woke cold. One night, as he finished the last smoothing of the hull, his father approached quietly. He sat beside Halvard and placed something in his hand. A curved shard of antler, carved with 3 loops. Halvard turned it over. It was old, smooth with years of handling. "My father gave it to me," Oddbjorn said. "What is it?" "A shape," the old man said. "Not a name, not a meaning, just a shape that calls the sea and keeps it looking forward." Halvard held it. The warmth of his father's hand still lingered on it. "Do you believe they drift forever?" he asked softly. "No," Oddbjorn said, "but where they go is not ours to know." "Do they remember?" His father paused, a long pause, long enough that the wind changed and a branch somewhere cracked. "If they do," he said at last, "they do not return." That spring, Arnie's boat was set afloat. The tide was high and the wind gentle. The boat drifted out like a breath exhaled, slow, long, irreversible. No fire, no song, just the sound of the sea accepting what it was given. And when it was gone, Halvard placed the antler, shard in the space where Arnie had lain. Not buried, not burned. Just set beside the last imprint of a man who had laughed more than he had spoken. That night, Halvard sat by the dock long after dark. The stars had returned, small and scattered like breadcrumbs across the sky. He watched them, wondering which ones were fire and which were memory. Have you ever stared at stars until they stopped looking back? Until they became just holes in something larger? Until you felt as though the sea beneath your feet and the sky above your head were not separate at all, but one great silence, holding all boats, all breath, all remembering. Halvard slept then, right there on the dock, with sawdust still in his sleeves and salt in his throat, and in his dreams, the water was full of boats, not crashing or colliding, but drifting, each in its own direction, at its own pace. Some carried people, some carried nothing at all, but every boat moved forward, and none of them turned back. There's a coldness tonight that isn't cruel, the kind that settles gently on your cheeks like the breath of a sleeping giant. Frost trims the edges of every blade of grass, silvering the earth, and the wooden beams of old sheds groan softly as they settle in the dark. Somewhere in the near distance, an owl calls, low and lonesome, and then the silence returns, thick as wool and kind as rest. Let yourself be still beneath it. Let your thoughts drift into the hush. The boat is not gone. It is only further out now, moving slow, as it always has, towards something older than destination. When morning came to the village, it brought a thin sun, more a suggestion than a warmth. Halvard rose early and found the frost had crept across his workshop floor, outlining each wood shaving and nailhead with icy light. His father's cot by the hearth was empty. He stepped outside and saw the old man sitting by the water again, as he often did now, bundled in furs too big for his thinning frame. He did not speak when Halvard approached. He only tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea met the mist. "You dreamed again?" Halvard asked, his voice quiet. Oudbjorn nodded. "I heard the oars." It was something Halvard had heard only once before, years ago, whispered between two old women during a funeral for a girl who had fallen through the ice. They had spoken of a sound beneath the water, not the creak of wood or the splash of tide, but the low and steady rhythm of oars, pulled by unseen hands. Not the living, not the dead, something between. Some said it was the ferryman of the drowned. Others said it was memory itself, rowing. Halvard knelt beside his father. "Did the boat return?" "No," Oudbjorn murmured. "It passed. Far out. I did not see it. But I heard the oars in my chest." And he tapped his breastbone gently, like a drum. Spring wore on slowly that year. The rains came late, and the birches leafed with hesitation. Halvard worked often in silence now, carving by instinct more than thought. He no longer questioned why some dead were burned and some were sent to drift. The rhythm of it had settled deep inside him, like tide water beneath the sand. But he did begin to notice patterns. The ones sent to fire often had lives threaded with community: warriors, weavers, merchants, midwives, people whose hands had touched many others, whose names were spoken easily in song or prayer. But the others, the ones given to water, had a different shape. They were those who walked alone often, or who spoke little, those who listened more than they taught, people with secrets in their eyes, and sometimes people with gifts. He thought of Runa, and how the birds had watched her from the thatch. He thought of Brander, and the reeds that shifted even when there was no wind. And now Arnie, who had whispered to his loom when he thought no one heard. One evening, as Halvard sanded the edge of a rudder, a traveler arrived. A woman, wrapped in a faded green cloak, with a pack on her back and mud crusted to her hem. Her face was lined, but her eyes sharp. She spoke with a southern accent from the coast beyond the mountain fjords. "I heard there is a boat right here," she said, "one who builds for the quiet dead." Halvard stood from his bench. "There is," he answered, wiping his hands. She looked him up and down. "You then?" She did not offer a name. He did not ask for one. "My mother has died," she said simply. "I carried her as far as I could." Halvard followed her down the path to the small sled she'd left at the edge of the woods. A linen-wrapped shape rested upon it. Not large, but not light. The air around it smelled faintly of thyme and old wax. A sprig of juniper had been tied to the wrapping, and a single red stone rested at the place where the chest would be. She had been prepared with care. "Where will you burn her?" the woman asked. Halvard looked at the sky, then at the shape. "I will not," he said. The woman lowered her eyes. "I wondered," she whispered. That night, Halvard worked late. The wood he chose came from a tree felled during a storm 2 years prior, a tree no one had dared use, for its bark bore a strange twist, like it had turned to listen to something no other tree heard. He sanded the hull slowly, almost reverently, and lined the interior with dry moss and 4 flat stones from the creek that bordered his mother's old garden. As he worked, his father came and sat beside the door. He did not speak, but watched. And at some point, Halvard asked without turning, "Have you ever wanted to follow one of them? See where they go?" Oudbjorn was quiet a long time. Then, once, when I was young. "What stopped you?" The old man's eyes clouded. "I heard the oars before the boat had left." Halvard paused. The sound of rowing? Number. The sound of being rowed. He let those words settle and did not ask more. By morning, the boat was done. The woman stood beside it, her cloak now clean, her boots brushed. Her mother's body had not stiffened. The herbs had kept her loose, peaceful. Halvard helped her lay the form into the boat, and together they tucked the moss along the edges. Before she stepped back, the woman pulled a small pendant from her own neck, a circle of braided copper, and placed it on her mother's palm. "Let her hands remember," she said. They pushed the boat to the water as the tide turned. It caught the current and glided away. The woman did not cry. She only bowed her head once, low, as if to the sea itself. And then she left without another word. That night, Halvard dreamed again. The boats were back. Only this time, they did not drift across the sea. They floated through the air above the water, casting no shadow, pulled by hands that glowed faintly like the bellies of deep-sea fish. He stood on the shore, unable to move, watching them pass. Each boat bore a shape. Not a body, not a face, but something like the memory of a breath. And with each one that passed, he felt lighter, as if his own memories were being taken, gently, with no pain. When he woke, his cheeks were damp. The fire had gone out, and his father was gone. Outside, snow had come early again, just a light dusting, like flour on a board. Halvard found the old man down by the water, sitting with his boots in the tide. He did not speak. He did not move. Halvard sat beside him and did not speak either. The silence was enough. For hours they watched the empty water. And at one point, so faintly he thought he imagined it, Halvard heard the sound of oars. Not above the water, not below, but inside the bones of the earth. Rowing, steady, endless, and somehow kind. Tonight the air tastes of stone and starlight, cool and weightless, as though the earth itself has forgotten its pull. Far overhead, a few stars blink through a silken cloud veil, and below, the grass is slick with dew, though no rain has fallen. Every sound seems to come from far away. The world feels wide and watchful, like the hour before a tide turns. Let yourself rest in that quiet distance. Let your thoughts fall inward, gentle as ash on a hearth. The story has not drifted away. It floats close still, moving slowly, like something with a destination it has no need to rush toward. Halvard did not ask his father what he had heard that morning, or if he had heard anything at all. The old man's eyes were red, but dry, and he sat long by the water before finally returning home without speaking. His boots left wet prints on the wooden floor. His breath smelled faintly of salt. The winter that followed came heavy and slow. The snows lingered, pressing down the thatched roofs until they sagged like the backs of old horses. In the evenings, Halvard and Audbjorn sat by the hearth, sharing silence more often than words. The flame crackled, but only low, a soft fire, one not meant for celebration or storytelling, just for warmth. Halvard worked less in the cold months. The boards warped in the frost, and the pitch grew sluggish in its barrels. But he still kept his tools sharp. He still went down to the water every morning, even when the shore was frozen and the boats were locked in by ice. Sometimes he just stood there, listening. Once, he thought he heard something below the ice, a distant thrum, like the pluck of a string under thick wool. He knelt and pressed his ear to the frozen surface, but there was nothing, just the sound of his own breath. When the thaw came, it did so all at once, The ice cracked like a breaking rib, and the sea took great, greedy gulps of itself, swallowing the edge of the land again. And with the thaw came something Halvard did not expect. A messenger, not a child, not a woman, not a neighbor, but a man dressed in furs so dark they looked like shadow, with a chain of carved driftwood around his neck. His beard was gray, but his face was not old. His voice was even and soft. "You are the one who builds boats for those who drift." Halvard nodded. The man reached into a pouch and pulled out a piece of cloth wrapped around something small. He unwrapped it slowly, and within lay a circle of polished black stone, pierced through the center. "This is her token," the man said. "She will die tomorrow." Halvard did not ask how he knew. Some truths need no proof. "Where is she?" "Up the river, in the ash house." Halvard had heard of the ash house only once. It was said to be a place where the sick went to speak to the trees before death, a place for endings or beginnings, depending on how one saw the turning of things. He took the token without hesitation. The boat he built was narrow, like a finger pointing toward the horizon. He chose ash wood, rare and brittle if worked wrong, but it felt right. He soaked it for 3 days, and when he shaped it, the wood made no sound. No creak, no split. Only silence. He lined the bottom of the boat with black wool and placed 3 river stones at the bow. No more, no less. The next morning, the man in the dark furs returned. "She has passed." Halvard nodded. He followed the man up the river. The journey took a day and a half, through trees that had not seen an axe in generations. The birds did not call here. The moss grew thick, as if the earth itself preferred to whisper. They reached the ash house near dusk. It was not a house as Halvard had imagined, just a hollowed grove circled by stone. In its center lay a platform of woven boughs, and upon it a woman, old, small, but still. Her face was covered by a veil of nettle fiber. Her hands rested on her chest, fingers curled slightly, as if she were holding something invisible. Beside her lay a second token, a flat piece of antler carved with the shape of a wave. "She dreamed the sea," the man said. Halvard nodded. He did not ask who she had been. He did not ask what she had seen. He only lifted her carefully, wrapped her in her own veil, and carried her back down the river. The return was slower. The current was against them, but the weight in Halvard's arms felt not heavy, just present, like something that knew exactly how much space it needed to take up in the world. At the shore, he placed her in the boat. This time, something stirred. A sudden breeze off the water, though the trees were still. A low rustle in the reeds, though no bird moved. And for the first time in all his quiet farewells, Halvard felt the boat push forward without his hands, not pulled by current, not driven by tide, but moving of its own. He stepped back and watched it go. No one else was there. No words were said. But when it disappeared into the fog, Halvard heard, very faintly, the sound of singing, not from the boat, not from the shore, but from the water itself, a song without language, without rhythm, without end. When he returned home, his father was asleep. In the morning, he was not. There was no struggle, no gasp, just stillness, like a tide turning without a splash. Halvard found him just as the sun crested the ridge, face turned toward the hearth, one hand open beside him. And in that hand, the antler shard, the one Halvard had placed beside Arnie so many months ago. He did not weep. Not then. He only closed his father's hand around the shard and sat beside the cot until the fire burned down to cinders. That afternoon, he built a boat for his father. It was not large, not adorned, not lined with symbols, but in its center, he carved a single groove, shallow and straight, from bow to stern. A path, not for the boat, but for the oars. He did not burn him. No one in the village asked why. Some said it was the boatwright's right to choose. Others, that Oddbjorn had whispered to the water in his final sleep. Halvard said nothing. He placed his father in the boat with one sprig of rosemary and one smooth stone. No more. And when the tide turned, he pushed it out. The boat drifted long, longer than any before. And when it vanished from sight, Halvard did not move. He waited. He waited until the stars came, and then he waited more. And when the tide turned again, he heard it, the oars. Not loud, not close, but there. And then finally, tears came. Have you ever cried without sorrow, just because something vast had passed through you and gone? Just because something you could never name had touched the edge of your heart and left it open? Just because you knew something was both over and forever? Halvard sat by the sea until dawn, and the sea said nothing, but it held the silence well. There is a heaviness in the sky tonight, but not from clouds. It's the hush before snowfall, that muffled quiet where even the birds pause mid-wing. The kind of quiet that carries memory, or maybe the memory of memory, something too old to be spoken aloud. You can almost hear the cold forming, one crystal at a time, inside the branches. Time doesn't pass in moments here, but in the breath between them. Let the quiet hold you. Let your thoughts float like frost over a dark lake. We're not far now from the place where names begin to fade. Let's follow Halvard a little further, not too quickly, for nothing is hurried where boats drift without fire. The spring after Oddbjorn's final departure arrived with gentleness. The snows melted not all at once, but as if in agreement. Slowly, kindly, in streaks along the thatch and gutters. The fjord was calm, too calm for the season, and the ice broke up in soft whispers instead of cracking roars. Villagers remarked it felt like the land was holding its breath. Halvard returned to work early, though he had not stopped in truth. The shaping of wood had become the rhythm of his grief and his remembering. Each stroke of the draw knife was like an exhale. The grain of the timber seemed to speak more clearly now, the knots more meaningful, the weight of a board more telling. His hands did not need to ask what the boat should be. They only needed to listen. He built 3 vessels that season. One for a man who had died in a storm with an axe still clutched in his fist. One for a woman who had wandered into the sea and never turned back. And one for a boy no older than 10 who had stopped speaking the winter before his death. Of the 3, only the first was given to fire. Halvard burned the warrior with his axe beside him, laid carefully on a pyre shaped like a crescent moon. The fire rose high that evening. The embers carried fast on the wind, like sparks seeking home. But the woman and the boy, they drifted. Their boats were quiet and small, with holes darkened by pitch and time. He sent them off at different tides, but each night after their departure, he dreamt the same dream. The water was glass, the sky was slate, and he stood at the shoreline watching boats return, not as they had left, but hollow. The ribs of the boats were empty, not broken, just empty. No moss, no linen, no weight. But still, the boats moved, rowing without hands, as if memory itself was pushing them back. He told no one of these dreams. Instead, he worked. And one morning, While cleaning his tools, he found something left at the edge of his workshop. A feather. It was black, and not from any bird he recognized. Long and oddly stiff, with a thin stripe of white near the tip. It had not blown in from the wind. There was no breeze that day. It stood upright between the slats of the wooden step, as if planted with intent. He picked it up and held it to the light. It shimmered faintly, not a trick of oil or dew, but of something else. Something like silence made visible. Later, he placed it in a small pouch and tied it to the rafters above his workbench. That night, he dreamed again. But this time, he was not on the shore. He was in the boat. And not as himself. He was someone small, cold, wrapped in wool that smelled of salt and moss. His fingers gripped the edge of the boat, but he could not lift his head. The sea around him was black, but not cruel. It moved in slow circles, turning not just the boat, but something inside his chest. And far ahead, not far in distance, but in knowing, a light, not a fire, not a star, something else, something that pulsed, and within the light, the shape of a person, or a memory, or a god. He woke before the boat reached it. The dream returned for 3 nights in a row, always the same, always ending at the edge of that pulsing glow. On the 4th night, the dream did not come. Instead, he woke to knocking. Real knocking. He opened the door to find a girl no older than 15, hair wild with wind, cheeks flushed with frost. She said nothing, only held out a satchel wrapped in sealskin. Halvard took it, wordless. Inside was a ring of iron, not valuable, not carved, but old. Older than he had words for. It felt heavier than it should have. And warm, as though someone had held it for hours just before placing it inside. The girl finally spoke, voice shaking. She's gone, but she wanted to go without fire. Halvard nodded. I'll come. She's far, the girl warned. He only nodded again. They walked for most of the day, into the hills behind the fjord, where no houses stood, and the rocks grew thick with lichen. They passed 2 streams, a grove of crooked pines, and a clearing where no birds sang. At the far edge of a ridge, beneath an overhang of stone shaped like a sleeping face, they found her. The woman, the girl's grandmother, Halvard guessed, was already laid upon a woven mat of grass and seawool. Her face was calm, her lips pale but not sunken. In her hands was a small wooden carving, half finished, shaped like a whale without eyes. She made it while she was waiting, the girl whispered. Halvard crouched and touched the rim of the mat. It was dry. She didn't want to be remembered, the girl added, only drifted. Halvard heard the word as if it were older than her mouth. Drifted, not drifting, not future, not past. A state of being, a choice, a return. He lifted the woman with great care, wrapped her in the mat, and tied the corners with grass twine. They walked back as the sun lowered behind the treetops, casting the whole fjord in a glow the color of damp copper. At the dock, Halvard prepared the boat, one he had built weeks before, though he hadn't known why at the time. Its hull was narrower than usual, its ribs thinner, almost delicate, but it held perfectly. He lined it with kelp-dried linen and placed the woman inside. Beside her, he placed the whale carving and the iron ring. The girl did not weep. She simply reached forward and brushed a loose strand of hair from her grandmother's brow. Drifted, she said again, then stepped back. Halvard pushed the boat as the tide whispered forward. It caught the edge of the current, turned slightly, and began its slow glide outward. The sky had darkened, and in its canvas, A single bright star had risen, low and sharp. The girl saw it too. She said, "That's where her name is now," she said. "Not her soul, numbered just her name." Halvard turned toward the water, and for a long moment he felt the name of the woman rise, not into his mouth, but into his chest. He did not speak it. He did not need to. He let it settle there. A weight, a stillness, and then the boat was gone. When he returned to the workshop that night, the feather had fallen from its string. He picked it up again, and this time it was warm. He placed it beside his tools. The sea was quiet that night, but not silent. The wind this evening is tired, not from traveling far, but from staying in place too long. It rustles the edges of the grass like fingers brushing hair behind an ear. Somewhere above the village, a dog barks once, then stops, as if remembering it was meant to sleep. The air is cool, with a taste of distant salt and something older, something like lichen or bone. Let yourself lean into that quiet fatigue. Let your breath match the sea's slow rhythm, where even the waves seem reluctant to arrive too quickly. Drift now, where names are left behind, and the sea holds them like pebbles beneath the tongue. Halvard had not expected the girl to return, but she did. A week after her grandmother's boat slipped into the fog, she appeared again on the path, carrying a folded piece of wool. Inside it were two small stones, smooth and pale like eggs. One had a black line through the center. "She said they'd come back," the girl whispered. Halvard took them gently, not speaking. He recognized the type of stone, river-washed quartz, only found where fresh water met brine in narrow shadowed places. Stones like these were sometimes used to mark graves inland. But the line through the center, that was rare. He placed the stone with the line on the shelf above his tools, beside the black feather. The other he carried in his pocket for days, until he felt its weight grow familiar. That spring was the quietest in recent memory. The village remained busy. Children still chased chickens, women still carded wool, men still repaired netting and hauled salt fish. But the noise of it seemed softened, as if something in the land itself had shifted ever so slightly. More than once, Halvard caught himself looking to the water without realizing he'd done so. His hands would stop shaping a plank, and his eyes would drift toward the sea, as if waiting. But nothing came. No boat returned. No oars whispered in the tide. Instead, there was stillness. And stillness, he had learned, was not absence. One evening in early summer, a storm rolled in without warning. Not a loud one. No thunder, no lightning, but a low, endless murmur that poured rain like breath through a horn. The sky pressed down heavy, and the hills seemed to lean closer. Halvard stayed inside his workshop, sharpening his blades and oiling the hulls of half-built boats. By morning, the storm had gone. But on the shore, something waited. Not a person, not a full boat, just a fragment, the curved edge of a prow, dark with time, its wood swollen but unbroken. It had washed in with the tide, nestled in the reeds like something sleeping. Halvard approached it slowly. He knelt and touched the edge. No pitch, no paint, no carving. But when he pressed his palm to the grain, he knew. It was one of his, one from long ago. Not his father's time, his. And though he could not say which boat, could not say whose, he felt a shiver pass through him, as if the memory of whoever had lain there still breathed in the fibers. He did not carry the fragment away. He did not burn it. Instead, he built a cradle of stones around it, right there where it had landed, and let the tide touch it each morning. He said nothing of it to the others. There are some returns that are not meant to be spoken of. Later that month, Halvard was visited by a woman with a broken voice, not from sorrow, from smoke. Her lungs rasped with each word, as if she had lived too long among hearths that never fully vented. She brought no body, only a pouch of items, a carved comb, a braid of hair, a spoon made of whalebone, and a single thin strip of leather with symbols burned into it. She is gone, the woman said, but not found. Halvard understood. Sometimes the sea did not give the body back. Sometimes it took the soul all the same. She wished to drift, the woman added, even if she reached the shore. Halvard nodded and began work that same evening. The boat he built for this absent soul was his smallest yet, little more than a cradle, shaped to rock even on flat water. He did not weigh it down. He did not line it with moss. Instead, he laid only the braid of hair inside, coiled like a shell. The spoon and comb he placed at the bow, and at the stern, the strip of leather, now tied in a knot that no hand would easily untangle. When the tide was right, he carried the boat alone to the shallow water and let it go. It drifted only a few steps out, then paused. Halvard watched it bob gently, held in place by nothing. The sky above was clear. And then, slowly, the wind turned. The boat began to move, not away, but sideways, south, along the coast. It floated like that for hours, visible even in the dusk, until finally it rounded the bend and was gone. That night, Halvard did not dream. And in the morning, the feather on his shelf had shifted position. It pointed now toward the sea. He said nothing, even to himself. The work continued. He built one boat each moon, even when no one had died. Sometimes they waited in the shed for weeks before they were used. Other times, someone would arrive at dawn with a name and a whisper, and the boat would be ready before the sun reached the water. He noticed things now he had not before. The way the pitch would flow thicker when it was meant for the sea. The way the grain of the timber curled differently when it would not see fire. The way the air itself changed near those boats. Not heavier, but quieter, like a breath drawn in and never exhaled. By the time he reached his 35th summer, Halvard had sent more than 24 souls to the tide. Fewer than half had been asked to burn, and he no longer questioned it. The sea knew, and it did not forget. He kept a shelf above his bed now, where he placed the items that remained. Not offerings, not relics, just remnants. The black feather, the striped stone, the carved wave, the leather knot. Each one carried a weight that was not physical. Some nights, he would wake and find the objects slightly moved, not shifted by wind, but angled, pointing, as if mapping something he did not yet understand. And still, he built. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to hold memory in your hands? Not the thought of it, but the shape, the grain, the scent, the soft breath of it just before it vanishes into wood. Halvard knew that feeling now. It had settled into his bones. He was no longer just the boatwright. He was the ferryman without a boat. And the tide had begun to speak back. Not with words, not with signs, but with return. And return, he had learned, is never the same as coming home. There's a silence tonight that presses against the windows, like a sleeping animal. Not threatening, only immense. The stars are veiled behind a high mist, and the moon is a pale blur, as if seen through wet cloth. The world is folded in on itself. The fire has gone to embers, and still the water breathes beyond the hills, pulsing in its rhythm. old, gentle, and endless. Let that rhythm rock you. Let it hold you, as the tide holds boats without anchors. No need to rush. The shore is near and far and always moving. Drift a little further now, where even names are salt dissolved and forgotten by design. By the time summer curled again around the fjord, the sea had returned something unexpected. Halvard found it at low tide, half buried in silt near the roots of a driftwood tree. A leather pouch, stiff with age and salt, its cords wrapped 3 times and sealed with a knot he recognized but could not name. It had not come from the village, nor from any of the dead he had known. And yet, it felt familiar. He took it home, but did not open it right away. It sat on the bench for 3 days, drying in the warmth of the fire, its smell somewhere between kelp and old wool. On the 4th morning, just before the sky turned fully gold, he unwrapped it with slow hands. Inside were 4 things: a length of red thread, frayed at both ends, a carved sliver of bone, smooth and thin, shaped into a spiral, a single feather, not black, but gray, marked with 2 white spots like eyes, and a stone, small, round, and warm. Halvard did not understand it, but he knew what it was: a calling. The sea was asking again. That day, he chose ashwood and yew. He worked without pause, without hunger. The boat that emerged was unlike any he had built before. It had no sides, only slats, like the ribs of a body still breathing. Between the ribs, he wove strands of bark and fiber, dyed with soot and crushed berries, until the whole shape seemed more grown than made. He did not line it. He placed no tokens, only the pouch, now resealed, resting in the center. And when it was done, he waited. 3 days passed, then 4. And then, just as the moon turned full, a woman came. She wore no cloak, though the wind was chill. Her hair was the color of ashwood bark, her eyes the color of tide pools under cloud. "I dreamed it," she said. Halvard only nodded. "He was never found. My brother." She stepped into the workshop without being invited and placed a small shell on the bench beside the pouch. "He was never meant to stay in this world," she added. "He was born with a silence inside him. We all knew." Halvard gestured toward the boat. "It's ready." She looked at it long. He would have liked that. Something unfinished. Together, they carried it to the water. The tide was high, but the waves were slow, as though waiting. When the boat touched the surface, it did not float. Not at first. It sank halfway, then rose, then settled. Not heavy enough to drift. Not light enough to fly. The woman placed her fingers on the rim and whispered something, then stepped back. And without wind, without current, the boat turned its bow to the west and went. Halvard watched until his eyes stung. Then he turned to the woman, who was already walking away. He never saw her again. That night, he did not sleep. He sat by the hearth, the pouch still warm in his palm, though it had left the boat. He did not remember taking it back. And when he finally drifted off, head resting on the bench, he dreamed. This time, there were no boats, no oars, no water, only a vast white space filled with feathers, thousands of them, falling not from above, but rising from below, and in the center, a stone well. He approached. Inside was water, but it did not reflect him. It reflected the boats, all of them, every boat he had ever built, and one more, not yet made. When he awoke, the hearth was cold, and the pouch was gone. But in its place, on the bench, was a scrap of linen he did not own. On it, written in ash, a symbol, 3 lines, curved like the shape of waves seen from below. That day, Halvard spoke aloud for the first time in a week. He said only one word: soon. He began gathering materials, not for a specific request, not for a known soul, but because the sea was shifting, and he could feel it in the wood. The planks bent easier. The pitch flowed without heat. The nails rusted if touched too long. The sea wanted something. No, not something. Someone. And Halvard knew. It would be him. Not yet. But someday. The boat he began building had no precedent. It was longer than the others, but not wider. Shallower, too. The ribs he left exposed, but he lined each one with a feather. Not all the same. Gull, duck, heron, even owl. Each collected slowly, with care. He wove moss between the joints, and inside, where others placed linen, he set his own tools. Not all, just one knife, one wedge, one small adze, dulled from use. When it was nearly done, he painted the bow, a single stripe of red, not bright, more like the memory of blood. And still, no one asked what it was for. The village knew now. Some things are not told. Some boats are not explained. He kept the vessel beneath the shed, covered with a cloth made from spun nettle and crowthread. Each day he checked it, not for rot, not for warping, but for silence. And the silence was always there. Not absence, presence. One evening, while trimming the last edge of the keel, he heard footsteps. He turned. The girl was back. Not a girl anymore. She had grown. Her hair now touched her shoulders, and her eyes had deepened into something unreadable. She carried nothing. But when she stepped inside, she said only this: "My brother returned." Halvard said nothing. She placed a small object on the shelf beside the feather, a pebble, shaped like an ear. She left without another word. And that night, the sea did not speak, but the wind did. It said, "Not yet." And Halvard nodded to himself. He would wait, because some boats are built not for the dead, not for the lost, but for the one who must carry them all. And when that time came, he would drift, and the sea would know him, not by name, not by story, but by the silence he had shaped into every hull. The air tonight is still as breath held beneath a wool blanket, not the cold kind, not sharp or shivering, but close, intimate, the kind of stillness that carries only the sound of your own heartbeat and the soft creak of wood settling around you. The world feels wrapped in itself. No birds, no rustling branches, just that quiet hum of being. Let that hush hold you. Let your thoughts settle into the grain of the boat that waits in darkness. We are drifting further now, not away, but deeper, toward the place where the sea remembers everything, and where even the silence has shape. Halvard's days had taken on the rhythm of breath: rise, shape, mend, wait. The boats came less often now, or perhaps fewer were being chosen to drift. Still, he worked, not always on vessels, but on little things: handles, combs, boxes. The kind of small wooden pieces that, when touched, remind a person that hands were made to hold softness too. The boat, his boat, remained beneath the nettlecloth. He did not touch it anymore, not out of fear. It was finished, he felt, but not ready. Sometimes he would sit beside it for long stretches, just listening. The pitch never cracked, the fibers never dried, and the feathers never gathered dust. It was as if the boat was breathing, slowly, like something asleep. One morning, while collecting driftwood for carving, Halvard found a child standing by the fragment of prow he'd ringed with stones seasons ago. A boy, barefoot, with hair like milk thistle and eyes pale as mist. He wasn't from the village. His clothes were clean but worn. He touched the wood lightly, then turned to Halvard without startlement. "Is that where they return?" the boy asked. Halvard approached slowly. "Some," he said. "Not all." "Do you wait for yours to come back?" Halvard shook his head. "Number one, wait for the sea to tell me they're not coming." The boy looked down at the curved plank again. "Does that make it easier?" Halvard considered. "No," he said, "but it makes it clearer." The boy nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then, without saying goodbye, he walked away, not toward the trail or the trees, but directly into the fog where the sea met the stones. Halvard watched, and for a moment the mist opened just enough to show no footprints behind him. He told no one. He had not spoken of such things for many seasons, but that evening he placed another feather, pale brown and slightly curved, onto the shelf. No label, no meaning, only memory. The dreams came less frequently now, but when they did, they came as echoes, not full visions, just impressions. A boat rocking without waves, a face he didn't know mouthing words he couldn't hear, a hand held out, not asking for help, but offering something invisible. He would wake with a sense of being watched, not by eyes, by the water, and it was watching kindly. One day, while gathering birch bark in the high groves, Halvard stumbled across a circle of stones, 12, perfectly placed, each one marked with a shallow groove. In the center was a dip in the earth, shaped not like a grave, but like a cradle. At its heart, a wooden bead. He picked it up. It was old, carved with the spiral he had once found in the pouch brought by the tide. His thumb traced its edges, and something inside him stirred. Not memory, but readiness. That night, he oiled the frame of his own boat for the first time since it had been built. He wiped each feather, cleaned each joint. He did not know why. He did not feel that the time had come, but he knew the sea was listening. And so, he answered. He began to hear whispers among the villagers, not fear, not reverence, but curiosity. Why hasn't he burned a boat in months? Has the tide changed? Maybe no one dies anymore. He heard these, always gently spoken, always just beyond reach. But he felt no need to correct them. He knew the truth was quieter than any question. One evening, as the sun bled its last light across the fjord, a stranger arrived. This one was different. No child, no widow, no mourning daughter. An old man. Older than Halvard had ever seen. His beard was thin and long, his spine curved like a sickle. He leaned on a staff carved with no runes, only grooves, smooth and shallow. He sat without invitation beside Halvard's fire. "You've waited a long time," the man said. Halvard nodded. "You know who you are," the old man added. "I know who I've become," Halvard replied. The man chuckled. "Same thing." They shared silence for a while, the fire popping low and soft. Then the man said, "Have you ever drifted in waking life?" Halvard blinked. "What do you mean?" "Let your body move while your soul stays still. Let the sea take your skin while your spirit watches from shore." "No," Halvard said quietly. "Not yet." The old man nodded and reached into his cloak. He pulled out a stone, black, round, flat, and placed it on the earth between them. "That's not for you," he said. "It's from you." Halvard stared at the stone. He recognized it, not because he'd seen it before, but because he had shaped it, years ago, in a dream. The man rose. "Good," he said. "Then the sea remembers." And without another word, he walked toward the dock. By the time Halvard stood to follow, the man was gone. That night, the tide was high. and the stars above were clearer than he'd ever seen. He sat by the unfinished hearth beside his boat and watched the water shimmer like black glass. He did not speak. He did not dream. But in his chest, he felt a turning. Not a call, not a push, just the tide, changing. The next morning, a boat returned. Whole, untouched. It floated into the reeds just after dawn, its ribs clean, its surface dry. Inside was a single shell, closed, tight, unbroken. Halvard lifted it and listened. There was no sound, but there was presence. The boat bore no markings, but he recognized the curve of the bow. It was his, from years ago. A vessel sent off for someone never named, never mourned, and now it had returned. He brought it into the shed, not to burn, not to bury, but to listen. The shell he placed in water. It floated, and when he pressed it gently, it opened, revealing not meat, but a spiral carved of bone, like the one from the pouch, like the one from the dream, like the one from himself. That evening, he did not eat. He did not sleep. He sat beside the boat, and the spiral, and the shelf of feathers and stones, and he waited. For what? He didn't know. But the boat beside him, the one under the nettle cloth, seemed to lean ever so slightly toward him, as though the tide had found its way into the wood at last. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be ready, but not called? To feel the rope loosen, but the boat still tethered? To feel your name dissolve, one letter at a time, into the waves? Halvard sat in that in-between, no longer a man waiting for the dead, not yet the one who drifts, but close, so very close. The mist tonight is thick, but not heavy. It moves like breath on a mirror, gentle, receding and returning, never in a hurry. You can almost imagine that the land itself is dreaming. Beneath it, curled in a silence it will never break. The sky is neither black nor gray, but the color of worn stone. In that stillness, a single boat could drift for days and never be seen. And yet, it would be seen, just not by eyes. Let your own eyes rest. Let the story carry you as quietly as the tide carries a boat with no name. We are drifting inward now, not just across distance, but into the deep folds of waiting, into the slow rhythm of a life shaped by hands and by silence. It had been many weeks since the returned boat found its way back to Halvard's shore. Since then, he had done little work, not out of sorrow nor sickness, but because the wood itself had fallen quiet. It was a feeling he had learned to trust. Some seasons were for shaping, some were for drifting, and some, rarest of all, were for stillness, for watching the water without needing it to speak. He did not light the hearth that month, not once. The days were warm enough, and the evenings, though chill, asked only for blankets and breath. The coals remained dry and dormant, and the air within the house began to smell like old pitch and sea salt. The nettle-cloaked boat remained untouched in the corner. But some mornings, Halvard noticed the cloth had shifted slightly. Not blown, not tugged, just moved, as if something beneath had turned ever so gently during the night. One morning, he woke to find footprints in the dew. Small, bare, leading from the boat to the door, and then vanishing. No child in the village claimed them. No traveler had passed through. Halvard did not ask. He swept them with a branch of willow and went on with his day. But that night, he lit a single candle and placed it beside the boat. He said nothing. He did not watch it burn. He simply went to bed. That week, he began to notice new shapes forming along the shore. Not objects, not gifts, not offerings, just impressions. Circles of flattened grass, rings of small shells, arranged too evenly to be chance. A line of feathers stuck upright in the sand, as if left by a passing wind that had fingers. And beneath it all, a sense of readiness. The villagers no longer asked questions about Halvard. He was still seen, walking to gather water, tending his garden, mending his roof. He was not withdrawn, only quiet. And the village understood that quiet was sometimes the most honest answer. Then, one dusk, as the light slid sideways across the fjord, someone knocked at his door. It was a woman with a braid down to her hips and a gaze that did not wander. She held a bundle wrapped in seal hide, but she did not offer it. Not yet. "I've come because he won't return," she said. Her voice was even, tired, but not grieving. Halvard stepped aside without speaking, and she entered. She placed the bundle on the bench, unwrapped it, and revealed nothing. Only a piece of water-worn wood, shaped like the tip of a rudder. "He left 3 summers ago," she said. "Took the sea, without a boat. Said he had to find something in the North Water." "Did he?" She smiled faintly. "He found what he needed, not what he wanted." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Halvard gestured toward the unfinished boat. His boat. The woman nodded once. "Yes," she said. "That one." He didn't ask how she knew. She didn't ask what it meant. Instead, they carried the fragment of rudder together down to the shore. The tide was out, the sea breathing shallow, like someone who dreams with their mouth closed. They buried the wood in sand, upright, not like a grave, more like a signpost. Then she left, and Halvard returned to the boat. That night, he oiled the feathered ribs again. He unwrapped the cloth fully. He set out his old tools, and he spoke a single sentence, though no one was there to hear it. "Tomorrow, I will mend the cradle." He did. Carefully, slowly, he wove a thin layer of seagrass beneath the bench at the center of the boat. Not for comfort, but to hold something that could not be held, a weight of memory, or perhaps of rest. Then he waited. Days passed, then weeks. Summer folded into the first crisp edge of autumn. The wind began to curl like smoke. The shadows thickened around the beams of his house. And on the final morning of the final warm day, Halvard heard the sea call. Not with words, not with sound, but with knowing. He rose before the sun, bathed in water left out overnight, dressed in linen he hadn't worn in years, and walked to the boat. It was not cold. It was not heavy. It felt as though it had always been meant to move, but only when he was ready to go with it. He did not take food. He did not take rope. Only one small knife and a flat stone from the shelf. At the shore, he found the tide had risen without foam. The sea was as still as a sleeping eye. And by the boat, waiting on the sand, stood a girl. The same girl from seasons past, no longer a child. She wore a simple braid. Her feet were bare, and in her hands she held a bowl of water. "From the place where your first boat stopped," she said. "The sea kept it cool." He dipped his fingers into the bowl and touched them to the boat. It shivered, just once, then settled. And without speaking, he stepped in. The boat did not rock. It did not resist. It simply accepted. And when the tide lifted it, the girl did not cry. She turned and walked back up the path. Halvard looked forward, and as he passed the point where the village disappeared behind him, he placed the flat stone on the cradle of seagrass, not as a burden, not as an anchor, but as a gift to the water, to the waiting, to the drift. The sea opened before him, and the boat, feather-ribbed, memory-weighted, moved without effort, without oars, without sail. And as the mist rose around him, he felt not loss, not departure, but return to something he had never left. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to leave without leaving? To vanish into silence that welcomes you? To become the breath between tides? Halvard did not look back. He did not need to. He was not going. He was becoming. And the boat knew the way. Tonight, the water is so still, it seems to hover, not flow. The sky above holds no stars, only the soft weight of mist, folded over the world, like linen laid upon a sleeping face. It is not dark. It is not light. It simply is. In this silence, the sea does not ask questions, and neither do you. Time is not a river now, but a breath, one you forgot you were holding. Let it out slowly. Let it carry you into the place Halvard has gone. Not a destination, not an ending. Just a widening of the world. Just a different way of being. The boat moved without sound. No creak of ribs, no splash of water against the hull. Even the wind had gone quiet, as if stepping back to make room for the passage. Halvard sat cross-legged in the center of the vessel, the seagrass cradle behind him, the flat stone resting gently in its nest of woven silence. There was no horizon. The sea met the sky in a seamless veil, gray, silver, salt blue, all shifting like breath under skin. At some point, he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. He did not count the hours. He did not mark the passing of time by light or shadow, only by the change in sound. The first change was soft, the faintest humming beneath the boat. Not music, not voice. Just a resonance, like wood touched by memory. The feathers along the ribs fluttered once, as if stirred by thought, not wind. The second was the scent. Not brine, not pitch, not even water, but moss, sun-warmed stones, and the clean breath of pine far inland. The kind of scent one remembers after waking from a dream of childhood. He opened his eyes. He was not alone. They were not people, not fully, not shapes as the world knew them, but presences. As if the fog itself had decided to remember a form. Some stood on the water as if it were earth. Others floated just beneath the surface, eyes open, mouths silent. None approached. But they watched, not with curiosity, with recognition, and Halvard felt no fear. They drifted beside him for what might have been minutes or days, and then, as silently as they had come, they were gone. No wake, no ripple, just absence, shaped like their presence. Halvard closed his eyes again. This time, the third change came in feeling. The weight in his chest, the one he had always carried, the one he had shaped into boats and adzes and silent gestures, began to loosen. Not dissolve, not break, but shift. As though the tide beneath him had finally reached the part of the sea that did not move forward or back, but only deepened. He touched the stone beside him. It was warm now, and within it he felt the pulse, not of life, of return. Then the boat stopped, not with impact, not with drag. It simply ceased to move, as if the sea had drawn a boundary, not a wall, but a threshold. Halvard opened his eyes once, more. Before him, the water rose upward, a pillar, a column of sea, held not by gravity, but by memory. Within it, shapes, boats, feathers, rings, braids, knives, the fragments of every passage ever made, those he had built and those built long before him. And beyond the pillar, land. Not land as he had known it, but something older. A curve of stone rising from the sea, soft with moss, lit by a light that did not come from sun or flame. A harbor without walls. a place where boats stood upright in the water, their prows reaching toward the sky, as if listening. Halvard did not row. He did not leap. He only stood, and the boat moved forward, slowly, into the harbor. No hands met him, no voices called. But as his feet touched the water's edge, the sea beneath him became solid, not hard, not land, but trust, and he stepped onto the moss. The moment he did, the boat sank, silently, willingly, and was gone. He turned, not to mourn it, but to witness. And what he saw, what he understood, was this: that every boat ever built to drift had found its way here. Every unburned vessel, every fireless farewell. They stood in the water like trees in an old forest, unmoving, but never lifeless. And among them walked the quiet ones. Runa, Brander, the boy who never spoke, the grandmother with the whale carving, the woman whose name had been forgotten before she died. They did not greet him. They did not need to. He was already part of them, already known. He walked, not toward, not away, just into the tall stillness, where boats were not symbols, but selves, where wood remembered the hands that shaped it, where silence had roots. And as he passed beneath the upright hulls, he felt their voices rise in the soles of his feet, not as words, as knowing, as if every farewell he had ever carved was now welcoming him home. He came at last to the center, a pool, still as glass. Within it, the only fire. A soft glow, blue, not orange, the color of dawn before the sun is born. It pulsed once as he approached, and then again. He knelt. He placed the stone, the one from his shelf, into the water. It sank with no sound, and when it disappeared, the fire flared gently, not brighter, deeper, and in that deepening, Halvard understood. He had not come to die, nor to rest. He had come to stay, to become, to wait, as the boats waited, for others to join him. To guide, not with words, not with hands, but with silence. He sat by the water, the moss beneath him warm, the light above him soft, the boats around him breathing. And the tide beyond the harbor moved on. Have you ever wondered where all the unspoken names go? The ones said only in dreams, or in the thoughts of those too tired to say them aloud. They come here, and the boats know them, and the sea remembers, and Halvard is there listening. The night is neither ending nor beginning now. It simply stretches, not long, but wide, like a blanket tucked in by the sea itself. There's no wind, yet the air moves, subtly, as if breathing through the leaves. Somewhere, far off, you might imagine a wave rising with no intention of crashing. Just rising, holding, remembering what it means to lift. In such a night, footsteps leave no prints. In such a night, you may drift without ever departing. Let yourself settle into that stillness. Let the hush wrap around your chest, loose and safe, like wool spun by unseen hands. You are not walking toward an ending, only deeper into the quiet center of all things. That's where Halvard is now, not lost, not gone, simply here. The harbor of upright boats did not move, but it was never the same twice. By the third day, if days could still be counted, Halvard noticed that the boats shifted slightly when he closed his eyes. Not in place, not in shape, but in mood. Some grew heavier in presence, others lighter. Some drifted upward an inch before settling. One, a thin vessel with green-streaked wood and a broken feather lashed to its bow, seemed to hum when he passed it. He did not try to speak to them. There were no words here, only memory. And the memory did not belong to him. It belonged to the boats. Each morning, or what felt like morning, Halvard returned to the pool. The pale blue flame within it pulsed with a rhythm he no longer tried to name. Once, he tried to count its flickers. He stopped at 23, not because it grew tedious, but because at 23, he remembered his father's hands, the way they held the grain of a rib, as if listening for breath. It was enough. He left counting behind. Instead, he began tending, not with tools. There were no adzes here, no knives, only gesture. Each time he approached a boat, one standing silent in the water's mirror, he would touch the hull. Not for repair, for recognition. Some whispered back, not aloud, but through texture. A knot that pulsed with grief, a feather that quivered with longing. Others offered no reply, only presence. He came to understand something then, that the drift never ended. The boats had not reached ashore. They had only found their silence, and silence was not stillness. Silence moved, within, beneath, through. One evening, while he sat beside a boat made of what looked like sea glass and willow, a shape joined him. Not a person, a presence. It stood beside him without weight, without outline, but he knew it was her. Runa. He did not see her face. He did not need to. The scent of rosemary and pitch, the weight of her name unspoken, it was enough. She did not speak, but she lingered, as if waiting. He turned to her and placed his hand on the boat. She placed hers beside it, and the boat shimmered, not with light, with recognition. They sat together for what might have been an hour or a lifetime. Then she vanished, not into mist, into memory. She had come, not for herself, but for him, to say that he had been known, and that now he was part of the silence. That night, Halvard returned to the central pool. The fire there pulsed brighter now, not hot, but close. And beside it stood a boat. His, the one that had carried him here. It had returned, not for departure, for transformation. The hull was unchanged, but the cradle, the seat of seagrass and stone, was gone. In its place, a mirror of the blue flame, flickering inside, gentle and quiet. He understood. He was no longer the one being carried. He was now the one holding space for others to drift. The ferryman, yes, but without a ferry, because now the sea itself was the vessel, and he, its quiet oar. From then on, when a new boat arrived, silent and upright, gliding between the mossy channels, Halvard was there, not to greet, not to explain, to witness, to remain, to let them know they had not arrived late. That drifting is not delay. That forgetting is sometimes the shape of being remembered more deeply than words allow. Once, a child arrived, the boat no bigger than a cradle, a red thread tied around the mast, no items, no feathers, only the scent of warm milk and summer ash. Halvard stood beside the boat as it settled. The child did not speak, but he felt the boat whisper in his ribs, "I am the first dream." He touched the thread, and for the first time in what may have been years, he smiled, not with joy, not with sorrow, with belonging. Later, another came, not in a boat, but as a wind. It circled the harbor once, twice, 3 times, before curling gently around his shoulders. It smelled of snow, of birch bark and quiet song. He closed his eyes and remembered a night as a boy, crouched in a shed, watching his father bend a rib into shape. He remembered the fire, the silence between words, the unspoken promise, "You will carry this." And now he had. Now he did. Now he would. Have you ever wondered where the keepers go? The ones who listen without speaking? The ones who carry the grief of others without ever setting it down? They come here, or rather, They become here. Halvard no longer marked time by boats, by tides, by dreams, only by the hush. Each hush different, each one sacred. He did not know how long he had been in the harbor, but one day, one hush, he felt something shift, not above, not beside, but within. The blue fire grew still, no longer pulsing, just being, and the water beneath the boats stilled completely. The silence deepened, and in that silence, he heard it, the oars. Once more, not below, not around, within, not rowing, but held, ready. And he knew it would soon be his turn again, not to leave, not to return, but to drift anew. This time, carrying not his own breath, but the breath of all those he had kept. Tonight, even the waves have fallen asleep. The sea, which once murmured along the stones, now lies as flat as silver hammered smooth by the gods. If you listen closely, the only sound is the slow exhale of mist over moss, as if the land itself is dreaming of the ocean it used to be. There's no pull here, no push. Only the soft curve of time resting in a still place. Let that quiet guide you, like fingers brushing your shoulders in the dark. Let it loosen the weight in your chest. You're not lost. You're simply floating in a story that remembers you, even when you forget yourself. Halvard stood at the edge of the pool again. The flame had changed. It no longer flickered. It glowed now, low and constant, like the final coal of a fire that chooses not to die. The boats in the harbor were still upright, still gentle in their breathless rise, but something in their rhythm had stilled too. Not in grief, not in warning, in anticipation. He could feel it, not with his ears or his eyes, but with the marrow of his bones, the same way he had once known the wood was ready for carving, or that a nail should stop just short of the grain. That quiet knowing, like the tide whispering its return long before it touches shore. He walked between the boats with bare feet, and the moss did not press against him. It gave way, as if bowing to someone who no longer needed permission. He stopped beside a narrow vessel, its ribs woven with seagrass, its prow marked by a loop of whalebone. It had arrived days ago, or moons, he did not know. No one had emerged from it, no form, no presence, just the boat, waiting. He sat beside it, laid his hand on its side, and closed his eyes. Inside the quiet, there was no image, no voice, no memory, only a pulse, not heart, not tide, just presence. And slowly, as gently as mist finds water, he understood. This boat was not empty. It was carrying a silence too deep to be named. Not a grief, not a secret, something older, something buried. And it needed him to drift again, not away, not to a new shore, but down, deeper than before. Halvard rose, returned to the central pool. The flame there did not grow brighter, but it warmed his face when he knelt beside it. He took nothing with him, not a feather, not a stone, not even the knife he had once thought he'd always carry. He placed his single hand into the blue water, and the boats turned, all of them, one by one, slowly, with reverence. They faced him, and behind him, without warning, without noise, a boat rose from the pool. Not his old one, not the one he had arrived in. This one was new, made of the same blue light. Its ribs shimmered. Its edges did not catch the eye. They invited it in. It floated above the water by the width of a breath. Halvard turned, met its shape with his own stillness, then stepped forward. The moment he placed his foot inside, the pool vanished. Not with a splash, not with a shift. It simply ceased to be, and all that remained was the boat, the light, and the sea below. But it was not the sea as he had known it. It was darker now, thicker, Not in danger, in memory. He was not leaving the harbor. He was entering it more fully. The drift began. No direction, no compass, no stars. Just the slow, deliberate sinking into a silence older than time. As the light dimmed around him, Halvard felt no fear, only recognition, like remembering the first breath he had ever taken, like standing at the edge of his childhood home, not to enter, but to acknowledge that it had shaped him. He drifted further, past the bones of whales, long since forgotten by sea and shore, past ruins of boats never seen by daylight, past dreams that had sunk before waking. And there, beneath it all, he came to rest, not stopped, just stilled. The boat did not rock. There were no waves here, only depth, only the weight of all that had ever been carried. He sat, not cross-legged, not straight-backed, just as he was. And the silence around him changed, not into sound, but into song. A song made of presence, of boats never burned, of names never carved, of stories that had been kept faithfully in the grain of oars and the curve of hulls. He heard Runa's dreams. He heard Brander's breath through reeds. He heard the child's red thread snapping like a twig in wind. He heard his father's fingers tapping the plank before placing it. He heard the oars. But this time, they were not rowing toward him. They were within him. He was the one rowing now, without moving, without boat, without sea. He had become the drift. He had become the tide. Not the tide that moves water, the tide that moves silence, the one that shapes memory, the one that holds every breath ever let go. Have you ever imagined becoming the thing you've spent your whole life building? Not a man who carves boats, but the silence that keeps them afloat. Not the ferryman, but the current beneath him. Halvard did not fade. He did not rise. He did not end. He remained. In every silent boat sent out without fire, in every red thread, every knot of seagrass, in every feather tied without question, in every hush that follows the letting go. He is there. And when the next boat drifts out, carried not by fire but by memory, you may hear him, not in voice, but in stillness, in the shape of the tide as it pauses, as if to ask, "Are you ready?" And then, without fanfare, without flame, without name, you drift. There is a kind of quiet that wraps around your bones like steam rising from snow. Not warm, not cold, just enough to remind you that your breath has weight and the air is listening. No moon tonight, only a dim veil of cloud stretching across the sky, like linen pulled over a sleeping face. But the water remembers the moon even when it's hidden. It moves just the same. It always does. So let us move too, gently, slowly, through this fog of memory, into the place where questions are not answered because they no longer need to be asked. There, beneath the sea's oldest silence, Halvard drifted in form, but not in flesh. His shape was held within the blue-lit vessel, but his presence had bled beyond it. Into the water, the echo of dreams, the wood of long-buried hulls. He was no longer a man waiting beside boats. He was the hush that rose when the boat left shore. He was the lull between footstep and farewell. He did not know how long he remained in that space beneath the harbor. But time was no longer a thing measured in hours or tides. It was a thing that unfolded like breath through wool, like the slow exhale of smoke curling into air. And within that slowness, something returned. A memory, not from his own life, but from the wood of a boat he had once shaped. A vessel sent out on a storm-thick night, bearing a young man who had spoken in rhymes, whose eyes had always looked past whoever stood before him. That boat had not returned, And yet now, here in the deep, Halvard felt it, the rhythm of that boy's hums. He had sung as he lay wrapped in wool, just before the tide carried him off. Not a song of sadness, a song of returning. That song now lived in the bones of this silence. It pulsed faintly within Halvard, not as sound, but as warmth. The warmth of hands in water, the warmth of wood shaped without nails. He drifted further, though the boat did not move. Shapes gathered around him again. Not figures this time. Vessels. Boats. Dozens. Hundreds. Some so old the sea had worn away their edges. Others sharp as if freshly carved. They surrounded him in a loose circle, suspended in the still water as if waiting for breath. None touched, none rocked. And then one by one, they turned. Not their hulls, but their attention. Toward him, not in expectation, in welcome. He felt the weight of their contents, not the bodies they had once carried, but the memory of what they had been trusted with. All of it pressed softly into the silence between them. He could not speak, so he listened. One boat whispered of a woman who had died with her arms open, reaching for a son she had not seen in 12 winters. Another carried the shadow of a name that had been spoken only once, at birth, before being swallowed by shame. A third held nothing but feathers, hundreds of them, tied with grass, left by a girl who believed wings were stronger than flame. And Halvard heard them all. He did not need to remember. He had become the remembering. It was then that a new sound entered the stillness. A knock. One knock, not sharp, not sudden, just definite, as though someone had tapped the wood just beneath his knee. Halvard looked down. There was nothing. But the knock came again. Softer this time, but closer. It wasn't a request. It was a knowing. He was being called, not upward, not outward, but back. Not to the village, not to life. Back to the moment before he had drifted, to the edge of the decision, and with it came a shape, not a boat, a boy, young, wide-eyed, hair damp with sea spray, hands shaking, holding a coil of red thread. Halvard knew him, though they had never met. He was the child from long ago, the one who had watched from the reed banks as Brander's boat had been sent away, the one who had stared at the sea not with fear, but with yearning. Halvard had once thought of him often, then forgotten him completely. Now the boy stood at the bottom of the sea, looking up, waiting. Halvard reached out a hand, not with fingers, but with presence. The boy did not take it. He did not need to, because he had already become a boat. And Halvard was the tide beneath him. A soft swirl of motion began to rise from the sea floor. The boats around them did not scatter. They rose, slow and upright, forming a spiral of vessels, each one glowing faintly from within, as if memory had taken on the shape of firelight underwater. The spiral widened. Halvard's blue boat rose with them. The boy's shape dissolved into ripples, and those ripples wove themselves into the seagrass cradle that had once held Halvard's stone. Upward they moved, but not toward sky, toward depth that circled back, like breath returning to the chest, like thought returning to silence. At last, Halvard stood again, though he had never left his seat, at the edge of the harbor above. The moss was damp beneath his feet. The upright boats stood still, waiting. And beside the pool where the blue fire once flickered, now sat something new. A bundle, wrapped in linen, tied with a red thread, no name upon it, no markings. But he knew. It was for him, not to keep, to carry. He placed the bundle in the crook of his arm, turned to the harbor, and began to walk, not to leave, not to arrive, but to become what the sea had always whispered he would be, the one who did not burn, the one who did not ask, the one who built silence into boats and boats into memory, the one who understood that drifting was not being lost. It was being found without needing to be seen. Have you ever walked forward without knowing the direction, but feeling in your bones that you've been there before? That's what it feels like when the boats turn to face you, one by one, without sound, without praise, just recognition. Halvard reached the far edge of the harbor. The tide was full. No boat waited, none needed to. He stepped into the water. The bundle in his arms remained warm. Behind him, the boat stood tall. Above him, the mist shifted. And ahead of him, a new silence opened, wide and soft and endless. He walked into it, not to vanish, but to become the space between memory and motion, where the boats wait, without fire, without questions. There is no wind tonight, but the trees lean anyway, not from pressure, but from listening. The sky is a blank slate, soft and unreadable, and the ground holds no shadow. Every sound has taken shelter, even the owls, even the small lap of tide against stone. What remains is a hush so deep it feels older than silence, as though the world is not merely quiet, but remembering something it once promised not to forget. Let yourself fall into that memory. You need not hold anything. Let go. Let the water carry you as it carries all things, gently, without needing to ask your name. Drift now, with Halvard, deeper, into the place that lies beneath the breath of the world. The tide welcomed him, not as a master, nor as a guest, but as one of its own. There was no splash when Halvard stepped forward, no disturbance of surface tension. His foot met the water as if the sea had turned briefly to moss and then back again. The bundle in his arms stayed warm, not with fire, but with the slow, steady warmth of something kept safe by time itself. The boats behind him did not sway. They remained still, upright, bearing witness, not as a farewell. As acknowledgement, he was no longer the one who sent the boats. He had become the boat, the silence that held them, the rhythm that turned the tide at just the right moment. Halvard walked across the water without walking. It was not distance that carried him, but intention, a gentle pulling, not from without, but within. The way a seed finds soil, or a song finds a throat. Soon, there was no horizon, only a circle of mist, wide and unbroken, and at its center, something new. A dock, but not one built by hands. It rose from the water like the spine of a creature long buried, made not of timber or stone, but of memory. Halvard reached it and stepped onto its surface. It held him, not with strength, but with trust. At the far end of the dock stood a figure, not solid, not shadow. A suggestion of shape, the memory of a man. Tall, bowed slightly at the shoulders, with hands clasped behind his back. No face, but presence. And Halvard knew, even before he approached, who it was. Audbjorn, not as he had died, not even as he had lived, but as he had always been. The space between gesture and word, between wood and water. Halvard stopped a few steps away. They stood like that, two silences meeting. Then, without speaking, Audbjorn turned, walked down a flight of invisible steps, and vanished, not in disappearance, in offering. Halvard stepped forward, alone once again, and found the steps beneath his feet. They did not lead down. They led in, deeper than the harbor, deeper than the tide, into the breath of the sea itself. The bundle in his arms pulsed softly, and so he descended, Each step softer than the one before, each breath lighter. The world around him dimmed, not into darkness, but into softness, light without glare, weight without burden. At last, he came to rest at the foot of a wide, open space. A chamber, though no walls defined it. A clearing beneath the sea. A breath made still. And there, in the center, was a cradle, not made of wood, not built of pitch or moss or feather, but of light. Thin strands of it, woven like reeds, glowing with memory. Halvard approached and laid the bundle within. The linen loosened, the red thread uncoiled, and from within emerged nothing visible, but presence. A presence so small and so immense it could only be described as beginning. Not a soul, not a spirit, but the first breath of something not yet known. The tide exhaled once, software complete, and Halvard stepped back. The cradle folded in upon itself gently and drifted upward, not toward sky, but toward memory. He watched until it was gone, and then he was alone, truly alone, but not lonely. He sat. There was no ground, but he sat just the same, and the silence came to meet him, not as emptiness, as fullness. He felt the boats again, not above, but within. Their weight, their hopes, their unspoken endings. He felt Runa, whose dreams never stopped. He felt Brander, whose fingers still moved in the reeds. He felt the boy, and the girl with the braid, and the woman who buried a rudder as a promise. He felt them all, and then he felt himself, not as Halvard, not as a name, but as a quiet curve in the breath of the world, not to be remembered, but to be held. Tonight, the quiet is shaped like a circle. There are no edges, no lines drawn between before and after. You are not drifting. You are not anchored. You are simply resting within a hush that has been waiting for you longer than you've been alive. No waves rise, no wind whispers, yet the sea is awake. And so is something deeper, the memory beneath all other memories. Let yourself sink gently into it, not to be lost, not to be erased, just to be held, like water holds a stone long after the hand that threw it is gone. Halvard sat without sitting. The sea beneath him had ceased to feel like water, and yet it held him. The shape of the place was no longer physical, but remembered, as if the chamber he now rested in had never truly been built, only recalled. The cradle of light that had carried the bundle upward was gone. There was no trace of the red thread, but Halvard could still feel it, somewhere above him, not drifting, settling, like a breath after weeping. He let his hands fall open, palms upward, and waited. There was no light, but he could see, not with eyes, with knowing. Shapes moved through the water around him, not boats, not souls, not the living, not the dead. Presences, carriers, bearers of silence. Some moved like branches pulled gently by current, others like birds in sleep. He recognized none of them, and all of them. One came close, not to speak, to share. In its wake came the scent of cold iron and the image of a loom with no thread. It had carried a woman who had died before her child was born. Her name had never been spoken afterward, but here Halvard felt her, not as pain, not as regret, as shape, as memory held gently by the tide. Another came. This one brought a sound, not a word, but a heartbeat. Fast, then slow, then still. A man who had died beneath snow, dreaming of the sun on the fjord. He had not drifted. He had not burned. He had only been found. And yet, the sea had taken him just the same. They all came now, the forgotten, the misnamed, the buried without songs, the ones whose boats had never touched water, the ones who had never been given feathers or fire or thread. They circled Halvard not as mourners, not as seekers, but as reminders. He was not alone, because he had never been, not once. Each boat he had built, each silence he had carved, had not simply delivered a soul, it had created space. And now, in that space, the sea was speaking back. Not with stories, with gestures, with memory too large for thought, too soft for language. He felt the feathered ribs of every vessel. He felt the moment each boat left his hand. He felt his father's silence and the reason it had always been enough. He saw again the child with the red thread, the girl at the edge of the moss path, the boy who had once watched Brander's boat disappear into the fog. They were all pieces of something larger, not a circle, a weave. He was not the center, he was a thread. And the sea. The sea was the weaver. Then something changed. The cradle returned. Not the same. This one was woven of kelp and dusk. It hovered before him, pulsing faintly, and within it a voice, not spoken, given. You may remain. The offering was whole. You may return. The invitation was honest. No pressure, no praise, only choice. Halvard sat with the knowing for a long time. He turned the weight of the two options slowly in his chest. To remain here, to become part of the deep hush, the keeper of silence, the rhythm of the tide's forgetting. Or to return, not as he was, but reshaped, recalled, a man again, or something close to it. To return not to life as it had been, but to the world above, bearing the weight of what he had carried here. He looked into the cradle and saw neither answer nor sign, only the soft space of trust. And then he smiled, not because he knew what he would choose, but because, finally, he was allowed to choose. So few are. And in that smile, he saw again his first boat, not the first he built, the first he dreamed. He was 6, maybe 7, and he had stood beside the fjord, watching his father strip bark from a plank. That night, in the dark, he had dreamed of a boat made of feathers, stitched with hair, light enough to float in air. He had never told anyone, but the dream had stayed with him. And now, the boat returned, not as memory, but as reality. It hovered beside the cradle, pale and soft, with feathers along its spine and loops of hair woven around its rim. It looked fragile, but it was not. It was enduring, like silence, like breath. Halvard reached for it. The boat did not move, but the water around it brightened. He placed his hands upon its side, and he felt both things at once, remaining and returning. He closed his eyes and let go, of thought, of form, of story, and in that letting go, he rose, not quickly, not upward, but inward. The boat held him, carried him, through memory, through hush, through the space between tides, and then the surface came, not with sound, but with light, a pale shimmer like frost on morning stone, and above it, air, not cold, not warm, just right. Halvard breathed in, and the world breathed with him. Have you ever returned, not as yourself, but as what yourself once loved, not to finish a story, but to hold it open for someone else? That is what he had become now, not man, not ghost, but the feather on the prow, the stone in the cradle, the hush in the tide, and above the water, along the fjord, someone, a boy or a girl, would soon find a boat they didn't build, waiting, upright, unburned. And when they touched it, they would not ask whose it was. They would only feel the silence curl around them like breath. And they would understand. It was theirs now, to carry. Tonight the sea feels like skin, warm in places, cool in others, and always breathing just beneath your touch. The stars have returned, not as a map, but as a memory. Pinpricks of quiet light scattered across the black, like someone had whispered names into the dark and the sky had kept them. No waves tonight. Only the gentle stretch of salt and time. Let your breath match that stillness. Let your thoughts float like a boat moored without rope. We are nearly there, not at the end, but at the far curve of the journey, where return no longer means going back. Somewhere along the eastern bend of the fjord, just before the land gave way to bracken and wind-slick rock, a child found a boat. She had come looking for her brother's sheep. One had wandered down the wrong path again, and her legs were tired. She was no more than 8, dressed in wool that smelled of wood smoke and milk, with one braid unraveling down her back. She found it near the waterline, nestled among the reeds. Not large, not old, but not new either. Its hull was light, as if shaped from ash wood that had dreamed of feathers. Its ribs were curved, lined with moss not yet browned by air. There were no oars, no markings, but it was waiting. She stood in front of it, not frightened, but quiet. The way one stands when entering a place already full of something sacred. Her fingers touched the side, and a small breeze stirred. Nothing else moved. No one called her name. So she sat beside it, for a long while, just to be near. She did not know the name Halvard. She had never heard of the boatwright. The village spoke of other things: fish markets, winter smoke, the new blacksmith with the crooked smile. But she felt him all the same, in the quiet, in the way the boat had not been built for her, but was still waiting just the same. She lay on her side and fell asleep, cheek pressed against the cold, damp grass, her foot touching the boat lightly, like a child asleep beside a parent's bed. And when she woke, nothing had changed, except the stillness. It had grown deeper, not heavier, just closer. When she returned home that night, she told no one. But the next day, she came back, and the next, until the boat was no longer strange, just part of the shore. Years passed. The girl grew. The boat stayed. Others came and saw it. Some tried to move it. It would not move, not from weight, but from will. The sea, it seemed, had claimed it without needing to carry it. Children whispered stories about it. One said it belonged to a ghost who never died. Another said it would only carry someone once they had forgotten their name. Most just called it the waiting boat. And still, it never moved. Not even when the tide rose and lapped against its side. Not even when the wind turned sharp and pulled hard from the north. It remained. And over time, the moss along its ribs dried and fell away, then grew back. The feathers along its edge faded, then reappeared. No one knew how. But no one tried to explain it. Some things are not stories. Some things are silences in the shape of story, and this boat was one of them. On the day the girl, now a woman, lost her father, she walked to the boat again, not to weep, not to be held, but to remember. And the boat, though it had never known her father, seemed to remember him too. She sat beside it until the stars came, then placed a stone, small, round, plain, beside its bow. She whispered no words, but the boat seemed to hear. A year later, when her first child was born, she brought the baby wrapped in wool to the same place. Let the little one rest against the boat's side. The child did not cry, only slept. And the woman whispered, "You will know this silence too." The seasons continued. People came, people left. Boats burned, some drifted. But the waiting boat remained. And every so often, someone new would find their way to it. not drawn, just turning in its direction, as if by habit they didn't know they had, and they would sit, for minutes, for hours, for entire nights. Sometimes they would leave something behind, a token, a thread, a bead, a broken carving. The boat never kept them. By morning, the gifts would be gone. Only the quiet remained, and those who had come never asked why, because something inside them already knew that the boat wasn't waiting for a gift, or a name, or even a journey. It was waiting for the moment someone realized they were not alone in the act of drifting, even while still. That silence could carry them, even without leaving shore. That memory was not a place you visited. It was a tide you could live within. And sometimes, if you were very still, you could feel someone there beside you, not watching, not speaking, but rowing. Inside you, for you, with you, and then letting go. Have you ever felt that? The sensation that something you cannot name has already forgiven you? That somewhere, just beyond the edge of language, a boat is waiting, not to take you away, but to show you that you've already begun drifting, that you always were. The waiting boat remains, not as a vessel, but as a promise. It holds no fire, only hush. It carries no name, only the shape of yours, remembered by the tide. And one day, when you do not expect it, you will find it. You will sit, and the boat will not move, not at first, not for a long time. But when it does, you will not be carried. You will become the water, and the boat will vanish, because it is never needed to leave, only to wait. Tonight, the quiet does not just surround you, it breathes with you. Each inhale a tide, each exhale a release. The night does not ask for anything. It only offers its soft weight, and waits for you to notice that you've been floating all along. Above, the stars hold their distance, not cold, not indifferent, just watching, as they always have. Let that watching comfort you. You've come far, not in distance, but in depth. Let yourself arrive, now, in a place that has waited for centuries without asking anything in return. The boat had not moved in decades, but it had never been still. Not truly. Its stillness had always been an act of waiting, a kindness, a breath held for someone else. And now, at last, it shifted. Not by wind, not by tide, but by choice. It did not creak. It did not groan. It simply unmoored. There was no rope, no anchor, but everyone who had ever touched it, even once, felt it. Something has changed, they thought. Something is leaving. They didn't say it aloud. No one needed to. The villagers had grown older beside the boat. They had learned not to ask questions it didn't answer. They had learned to speak softly when passing it, to nod sometimes, without knowing why. And now, as it floated from the reeds for the first time in memory, no one followed. They only stood in the dark, watching. The moon was low, the tide was high, and the waiting boat moved forward like something that had never truly belonged to land. It glided toward the fjord's mouth, past the rocks that tore lesser holes, past the birds that cried without cause, past the place where the water always changed color at dusk. Inside it, there was no body, no oars, no fire, only stillness. And within that stillness, the echo of a man, not a ghost, not a god, just someone who had once chosen not to burn, the one who had built boats to remember what others had chosen to forget, the one who had listened for silences deeper than speech, and who had, at last, become silence. The boat drifted for a day and a night. No storm rose, no fish broke the surface, only fog, only rhythm, and as it reached the deep part of the water, where even the tide hesitated, it paused. Not in fear, in reverence. And then it began to dissolve. Not sink, not splinter. Dissolve. First the feathers curled inward, like leaves at the end of summer. Then the moss slipped free, each strand floating upward before vanishing like smoke and water. Then the ribs, not breaking, folding like wings. And finally the hull, which had never borne a name, opened like the mouth of someone who no longer needed to speak. There was no flare, no heat, no ash, just absence, complete, kind, unhurried. And beneath it, nothing was left but the wake. A ring of gentle current that pulsed once, twice, then stilled. No fire had taken him, because he had not needed fire. His passage had not been marked by flame or chant or smoke rising to the gods. It had been marked by patience, by the unspoken tenderness of things left unsaid, by the silence between one breath and the next. In the village, the girl, now older, now mother to a boy with quiet eyes, woke in the middle of the night. She stepped outside and looked toward the shore. The boat was gone. She did not cry. She did not call. But she knelt by the water, placed her hand to the tide, and whispered, "Thank you." In her heart, she felt no grief, only stillness, and the understanding that some departures do not need footsteps. Some endings are not meant to be witnessed. They are meant to be felt. Later, when her son asked about the boat, she smiled gently. "It waited," she said. "For who? For someone who had already left?" "But it was still there," he said. "Yes," she whispered. "Because sometimes we need to wait for ourselves to catch up with what we've already become." The boy said nothing, but that night he dreamed of a feather in the water, floating, then flying. Years passed. The boat was never rebuilt. No one tried. But sometimes, near the waterline, children found a small stone, or a single piece of driftwood, curved like the side of a boat too small for a body. Sometimes they found feathers, wrapped in moss, tied with grass, and each time they carried them back with reverence. They didn't know why, but they felt it. The hush, the memory, the drift, and every now and then someone would say, "It's time again." And they would build a boat, not from need, but from knowing, and send it quietly into the sea. No fire, no name, just silence. Because Halvard had shown them, not every passing needs to be bright. Some are better kept in hush. Not every boat needs to carry a body. Some carry only what's been remembered too long. Not every goodbye needs to be spoken. Some are breathed into wood, laid in the shape of a cradle, and trusted to drift. Tonight, nothing rises. Not the tide, not the wind, not even thought. The world lies flat and open like a great sheet of wool stretched over the sea. Weightless, boundaryless, still. And if you wait long enough, if your breath slows to match the rhythm of the water you can't hear, you may notice that everything around you, the trees, the stars, the sea, has paused, not stopped, just listening. Because some endings are not meant to close. Some are meant to echo. And you, dear listener, are now drifting within that echo. The boy who dreamed of feathers and stillness grew up by the shore, just as the girl before him had. He did not remember Halvard, not in name, not in form, but he knew things others didn't. He knew how to sit beside a boat and say nothing for hours. He knew how to listen to silence without becoming restless. He knew, by instinct alone, how to choose wood that would not burn. Not because it couldn't, but because it shouldn't. His mother never told him the full story. She didn't need to. She only taught him to watch the water without expectation and to wait until the tide asked first. And when it did, he would nod and begin. He carved his first boat when he was 11. It was not large, not meant for use, but it floated. And when he released it into the stream behind their home, it did not turn or twist. It went straight, and it did not return. At 13, he built a second, shaped like a crescent moon, with ribs woven from dried grass and lined with the quiet curve of black feathers he'd found near the alder grove. No one had died that year, but the village felt full, like something needed to be carried away. So he sent the boat into the sea. No one followed, but many watched. And when the boat disappeared behind the mist, they did not cheer. They did not mourn. They exhaled, and the wind changed. Years passed. The boy grew quiet in speech and steady in movement. He did not become the village boatwright. That task belonged to another, but he became the one they called when the silence returned. He built no pyres. He held no ceremonies. He asked no names. But people came to him anyway, with thread, with hair, with carved bone, with feathers. They didn't need to explain. He understood. He was not Halvard, but Halvard had drifted into him, and into the wood, and into the practice of drifting itself. One day, he found something on the shore that no one else had seen. A small, shallow shell, closed, but not empty. Inside it, wrapped in what looked like a breath of wool, was a spiral of bone, just like the one spoken of in old whispers. He brought it home, placed it beside his bed, and that night he dreamed, not of waves, not of boats, but of silence, stacked like stone, waiting to be carved. Far away, deeper than depth and older than direction, the harbor still stood. The boats still waited, upright and patient. They no longer needed the touch of tide. They had become the tide, each one a breath, each one a story remembered so deeply it had forgotten how to end. In the center, where once a fire glowed blue beneath the water, now stood a circle of stillness. Within it, no flame, no cradle, just absence, but not emptiness. Presence turned quiet. Halvard was there, not in form, not in voice, but in every pause that comes just before someone lets go. He was the hush in the hands of those who knew to wait before building. He was the weight in the chest when a boat turns into the mist and does not return. He was the echo of memory passed through fingers instead of words. He was what remained. In time, the village changed. Houses leaned in different directions. Names faded, were replaced, forgotten again. But the waiting boat was spoken of still, not as a myth, not as a miracle, but as something true. And sometimes, on mornings when the sea was so calm it seemed to forget its own shape, someone would find a boat already built, small, simple, unmarked, waiting at the edge of the dock. No one saw who brought them. No one asked. But they always knew when it was time, because the silence would thicken, and someone would say softly, "It's returned." And the boat would drift. No flame, no horn, no mourning, only hush. And sometimes, only sometimes, a child would stand beside the old ones watching and feel something inside themselves shift. A knowing, a loosening, a beginning. And so the story does not end. It widens. Because not every fire must be lit. Not every life must burn. Some drift, not to disappear, but to deepen. Not to escape, but to carry. And in the quiet between one wave and the next, there is always, always a boat waiting. Feather-ribbed, moss-lined, cradled in hush, ready to go, or to stay, depending on what the sea asks and what you choose to give.